Hi, I'm Lou Eisen, boxing writer and historian, and this is Ring Talk. And I just want to thank our producer, the lovely Eric Boyce. And he is lovely, by the way, because the picture he showed at the beginning is from that fight. That was from the LaMotta Robinson fight. Now, it was my mistake. I said first fight. It's the second fight. But you see Robinson going through the ropes there. Robinson was very young at that point. And also, this is unbelievable. So you have this fight, and LaMotta enters the ring at 160 and a half. Robinson enters the ring on that day at 144. Although Chris Dundee, the promoter, Angelo's brother, said that he actually entered the ring at 141 and a half. And on that particular day, February 5th, 1943, in Detroit at the Olympia, and they had a fight previously on October 2nd, 1942, in which Robinson won that fight by unanimous decision. What's interesting about these fights, if you look at the early careers of Ray Robinson and LaMotta, 1940s and 50s, you'll see each of them fighting 4, 5, 6 times a month. That's what was done then. Top guys today will fight twice a year. Last night, Tony Harrison hadn't fought in a year and a half, and Tim Tszyu hadn't fought in a year. So it was quite common back then, excuse me, for fighters to not, to fight 4, 5, 6 times a month because the money wasn't as good as it is today. You had to fight more often, and you needed to make a living, and it was the best way to stay in shape. Plus, these were hungry guys, and they wanted to get to the top of the ladder in their respective weight divisions. Robinson, because of his height, 5'11", was a welterweight, but we knew he would go up. People knew he'd go up to middleweight. He won the welterweight title against Tommy Bell, but he only stayed in the division a short time and moved up to middleweight. And he fought middleweight while he was a welterweight, and he could do it because he had the power and, more importantly, had the skills and the speed. However, at the time, I think it was the 30th fight. When the second time they fought, Sugar Ray Robinson was 40-0, and I think LaMotta had already had 36, 37 fights and lost a couple, one to Sugar Ray. And Robinson, anyone who faced LaMotta, had never faced anyone like LaMotta. LaMotta wasn't like any fighter you've seen today. People compare him to Mike Tyson, to him. That doesn't do him justice. Do you know when you see a fight begin and the fighters, and this is quite common, fighters come out and they're probing for weaknesses. They're looking for you to make the other fighter to make an error. Excuse me, make a mistake. And then they want to take advantage of it, which is one reason why, when I was in Cinderella Man, Ron Howard said he didn't like the Rocky movies, because the Rocky movies were throwing, these guys were throwing thousands of punches around. And except for a Matthew Saad Muhammad light heavyweight title fight, or other fights or smaller weights, that rarely happens. Fighters are probing. It's like a chess match. They're looking for a mistake, and then they capitalize, jump on you like a tiger on a wounded animal. So what happens in this fight, in their first fight, the bell rings and Robinson comes out. It's the fight that Robinson won first, and he's expecting, LaMotta to come out, touch gloves and have a feeling out round. LaMotta rushes him like a linebacker and bulls him to the ropes and just starts pounding his body and pounding his head. And in his corner, he had Al Silvani, who appeared in Rocky and a lot of movies. Al Silvani became an actor, but he was a great corner man. And LaMotta is also trained by his brother Joey, and he's bullying him up against the ropes. That's why they call him the Bronx Bull, the Raging Bull. He just got up there into the guy's face. He knew LaMotta was not a pure slugger, as people thought. People thought he was just a walk-in slugger, a guy who would take a lot of shots to the head just to get one of his own in. That wasn't true. LaMotta lived to be 95, and he was clear-headed on the day he died. Never suffered from pugilistic dementia. So LaMotta was smart. He's 5'8", Robinson's 5'11". I'm 5'9", and I met Jake a lot of times. And I don't know if he was 5'8". Dundee told me he was probably 5'6", but he said 5'8". Anyways, he knew, and I never understood this. Some fighters get it, some don't. last night watching Tony Harrison and Tim Tszyu, even though it's a small ring, I'm thinking to about Tony Harrison. If you keep moving and using your lateral movement, you'll keep forcing Tim Tszyu to reset himself. You won't let him get leverage on his shots. That's the way to fight a guy who's a pressure fighter. But he didn't do that. He stood in front of Tszyu and took a terrible beating. So LaMotta knew going in against Robinson, it's a taller man with a longer reach. And what does a guy like that need to be successful? He needs room. Robinson needed room to stand back and get his long arms going and to use his lateral movement. So LaMotta knew that he had to get under Robinson's jab, like Basilio did years later, and start hammering his body. And what he was told to do by Al Silvani and Joey, his brother, who he loved, unlike in the movie, they never had a falling out. They were close throughout their whole life. He got in close with Sugar Ray Robinson, and he put his head on his chest, but he put his left leg between Robinson's legs. So when you're doing that, you're cutting Robinson's balance off, meaning even when he's against the ropes like this, he can get shots off, but they're arm shots. He can't get his full weight behind him, and he can't move to either side. And when he tries to move, LaMotta comes forward of the shoulder, and he's pounding him. But you got to give Robinson credit. I mean, Robinson was a tough son of a bitch. He took all those shots from LaMotta, worked his way off the ropes, and it was a very close fight. They gave it to Robinson by unanimous decision. And LaMotta debated that for the rest of his life. He thought, I beat him. I mean, look at, who would you rather be? That's the criteria. Look at us after the fight. I'm unmarked, which is unusual. He's beaten up. You're going to tell me that I lost that fight? I mean, Jake had a 16, 18-pound weight advantage. So he loses that fight, and he's angry now. I mean, Jake was angry at the world. As a boxer, they say you can't fight angry. You make mistakes. Jake fought angry. So did Duran. Jake fought with a giant chip on his shoulder, and he took it out on everyone he ever faced. So they have their second fight of the 6 they had, and this was truly a great fight. It took place in Detroit. Now, people would think that Robinson would be the favorite because although he was born in the South, I believe in Georgia, he as Walker Smith, his family moved to Detroit, to Black Bottom, and then moved to New York. Robinson, as we know, is from the Bronx, but he fought a lot in Detroit in the early part of his career, so he became sort of a hometown favorite. It became his home away from home. So Robinson, by the way, was fighting in a tournament, and his name's Walker Smith, and the guy, Ray Robinson, who was supposed to fight, Robinson couldn't get a card for the tournament. He was underage. So it was a Golden Gloves tournament. So when the guy didn't show up, he said, I'll be Ray Robinson. And he did so well that they mentioned him in the newspaper, and then he kept the name and then changed his name to that. His trainer was the great Harry Wiley, whose son, who was a close friend of mine, Harry Wiley Jr., passed away recently. And his manager was George Gainford. Everyone gave Gainford credit for creating Robinson, but he didn't. He was the manager. It was Harry Wiley who taught him how to fight. All those moves you saw Robinson do, the double left hook, double jab, left hook off the double jab, the right to the belly, left to the head, the ducking, the moving, the slipping and sliding, the shoulder roll. That was all Harry Wiley who taught Robinson. Robinson was a great student, and he learned it, and he learned it well. And, when he turned pro, after his first couple of fights, I mean, he was beaten early on, former champions like Fritzy Zivic, Henry Armstrong. He was great. And one of the reporters said to Harry Wiley, you got a sweet fighter there, my friend. He is sweet. And Harry Wiley said, yep, he's sweet as sugar. And hence Sugar Ray Robinson. Bronx Bull for Jake LaMotta wasn't any mystery. He was built like a bull. He had the temperament of a bull. And once the referee said, let's fight, that was his favorite moment in his life. He lived for battle. So we come upon this second fight, February 5th, 1943 in Detroit. And once again, LaMotta's got a 15, 16-pound weight advantage. And you know, it 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 was a really good fight, and LaMotta had a specific game plan going in. He thought I had Robinson in the previous fight, but I let him get away from me. He started to move, and once Robinson moved, it was difficult. LaMotta was good at cutting the ring off, but Robinson was so quick, and because he was so much lighter, LaMotta had time trying to stop him. How do you stop a guy like that? It's difficult because Robinson's great at fighting and boxing, technical boxing, but he's also a tough guy. And you would think a guy with a 16-pound weight advantage who is a hard puncher like LaMotta. For instance, when I look at LaMotta's ring record, he had 106 fights, 83 wins. And, many of those were knockouts. And of course, Robinson had twice as many, 174 wins. So these guys could fight. LaMotta was doing his best in the second fight, but he knew he had to adopt a different strategy. He couldn't let up. It was a 10-round fight, but he couldn't take his foot off the gas pedal. He literally could not allow Robinson to get away from him. So the picture you saw at the beginning of the show, that's from the second or third round. He dropped Robinson. He hit him a good shot, and rather than, after hitting him a good shot, some guys will wait and look for the perfect shot. LaMotta didn't do that. After he hit him with that, sledgehammer right hand and staggered him, he hit him with a left hook in the liver and then another sledgehammer right hand. And Robinson tried to hold, but LaMotta, who was significantly shorter, was able to work his arms and shoulders free and keep belting him. And Robinson went through the ropes. It was a knockdown. Robinson got up immediately. He should have taken more of a count, but he got up, and LaMotta, when the referee looked at him and said, "You all right?" "Yes." "Do you want to continue?" "Yes." And the fight went on. But from the time Robinson said yes the second time, LaMotta, like that, right on top of him, still pounding him. LaMotta's using his shoulders. He's putting his head right here in his throat, in his Adam's apple, which is an old trick, because when you do that, you get the other guy's head to move back, and then all LaMotta has to do with the shorter arms is take a half step backwards and whack him again, over and over and over. And when Robinson tries to cover up like this, LaMotta's hitting him. He's hitting him with his arm, forearm, elbow. This is a fight. This isn't a dance. LaMotta said jokingly after, "I fought Sugar Ray Robinson so many times, it's a wonder I didn't need diabetes." Or I didn't need insulin. It's a wonder I didn't get diabetes, not need diabetes. My mistake. So he was rough on Robinson, but Robinson didn't complain. It's not like fights today where guys are always turning to the ref and complaining. Now, last night, Harrison did hit Tim Tszyu low, and Tszyu moved back and did what fighters have always done. He touched his own cup and he said, "Hey, that was low," and Harrison acknowledged it. That never happened back then. When you hit a guy low back then, the other fighter he didn't like it, but he that's what are you going to do? Can't complain to the referee. Referee doesn't care. He can't do anything about it. The only way to stop a guy from hitting low is to hit him back low. And the perfect example of that was Matthew Hatton against Canelo Alvarez, when Matthew Hatton kept hitting him behind the head, all these rabbit shots, and the referee kept warning him. And finally, after one clinch, Canelo, and I loved it, turned Hatton around. He was behind him and started pounding on his head like a speed bag, and then said, "How do you like it?" And after that, Hatton didn't do it again. That's the only way to stop a guy from fouling you. Referee can't do that. It can take points away, but doesn't mean the guy won't do it again. So LaMotta are fighting. Now, the fight takes place in 1943. It's significant because this is in the midst of World War II. Robinson was in the Army, and he was in with Joe Louis. Robinson hated the Army. The Army back then was segregated, and it was just absolute hell on earth for African-American servicemen. And they got treated like garbage. Didn't matter if you were Ray Robinson, they would still treat you like garbage and challenge you to fights. And one day, Joe Louis and Robinson were walking somewhere. They'd been asked to go somewhere to a press conference, to talk to the reporters about life over in Europe. Or this was in the States, life in the Army, excuse me. And some lower-ranking officer said to Joe Louis, "Hey, you N-word, get over here, get out of that line." And Robinson said, "That's Joe Louis. That's the undisputed heavyweight champion. I don't care, you stupid N-word. He ain't nothing but an N-word to me. Get over here." And Robinson jumped the guy, beat him up, and then, both of them got arrested. And Louis, people would call Louis later on an Uncle Tom, but that certainly wasn't true. Louis had a speech impediment, so he was hesitant to speak in public. But he had a lot of power out of the ring as well. So he had a friend in Washington who called someone else. And then they had the Secretary of State call the commanding general at that camp and say, "What the hell's going on? Why is Joe Louis being called this? He's the best rep we have in the Army. He's getting people to join the Army by the hundreds of thousands, including African Americans, him and Ray Robinson. Why are you doing this?" And of course, those officers that call them names and that were bumped down several stripes and then kicked out of the Army as well. They should have been. Robinson didn't want to be in the Army. He thought, this isn't my war. This is a white person's war. And I shouldn't be here. I'm getting treated poorly. I could be in New York making money. It's hard to believe that the Allies won't win if I'm not in the effort. So Robinson went AWOL, disappears for a couple weeks, tells them when he shows up that he blacked out. He had amnesia, and they believed him. Basically, he just said, I'm not going to do this anymore. And that was it. But because he was the great Ray Robinson, he was able to get away with it. LaMotta, I think, because of his temperament, that he was so easily angered and so willing to fight, he just didn't want his type in the Army, although he probably would have been a good soldier. So LaMotta was a guy who, when he trained, especially for Robinson, LaMotta, you see guys training today, but LaMotta would run 10, 15 miles a day, 7 days a week. There were no weekends off for Jake LaMotta. He didn't look at it that way. He wasn't going to leave anything to chance. He wasn't going to let Ray Robinson beat him because he wasn't in shape. So when he was told, you do 1,000 sit-ups, he said, that's nothing. I'll do 5,000 sit-ups and 5,000 push-ups and 5,000 chin-ups. He wanted to be able, to take on a tank. LaMotta wasn't going to leave anything to chance. Robinson's training camps were a lot more lighthearted, but he worked hard. He was great at skipping rope. He was great on the speed bag, great on the heavy bag. And, back then, unlike today, where guys get into spar and they wail on each other, back then what they did was they'd work on certain situations. So all of Robinson's, for the second fight with LaMotta, his sparring partners were 5'8", 5'9", and they all mimicked Jake LaMotta's style. And what Harry Wiley had him work on was, you're against the ropes. We'll start like this. You put your leg between Ray's legs, and you have your shoulder pinning him in. And then they'd start the sparring, and he would say to Ray, "How do we get out of this? What do you do?" And Wiley would get in the ring with him, and he would say, when he leans forward like this, you can use your right arm to push his head away, or put your arm over and hold him down. And when the referee breaks you, you can move along the other side of the ropes and get free. But when he gets close like that, you got to tie him up, and you got to move your head to the side or move it farther back, because he's going to keep doing that to you. Conversely, in LaMotta's camp, LaMotta, it's not that he disrespected Robinson. He just thought, I can beat him. He's not special like people say he is. And so what he was doing at that time, he had guys imitating Robinson, and he was just looking for new ways, to try to trap him in the corner or try to trap him against the ropes. Against the ropes, they're in the corner when you don't have your leverage behind you, and all you can do is stand there and take shots. That was the best thing for LaMotta. If LaMotta could trap you, he could take you out. So Robinson is there, and at his camp, LaMotta's at his camp, and he's thinking, there's got to be different ways that I can do this. And he realized, speed. I can beat him with speed. Now, Robinson was blindingly fast hand speed and foot speed. LaMotta was quick. There's a distinct difference between fast and quick, and I've spoken about this before. Fast is if two fighters are facing each other and they both throw punches, whoever gets there first is the fastest. Quick is when you see a mistake your opponent makes and you capitalize on it before you can correct his mistake. That's quick. And LaMotta was quick. So LaMotta knew when that fight began, the first thing he does is he doesn't walk, he runs right out at Robinson. And Robinson, before he could do anything, is just trying to get out of the way. He's trying to land his jab, but LaMotta's bobbing up and down, he's moving side to side. And LaMotta's just touching him. So even if LaMotta, throws the left hand and the jab just misses him like this, he's still going to come back and grab Robinson's head. He's still going to hit him to the side and grab his left arm. So he's still going to keep grabbing him. And when he grabs him, he can hit him. He wants to make it a street brawl. He wants to rough him up for the whole time. He doesn't want to give Robinson the room to be eloquent. He doesn't want, or elegant, excuse me, not eloquent. Eloquence when you speak. He doesn't want him to be elegant in the ring. He doesn't want him a chance to get into his rhythm where he can just keep circling LaMotta and keep making LaMotta shift and then reset himself continuously. And then LaMotta has to wing punches. That's what Robinson wants to do. Just keep him on the end of the jab. And that was a smart way to fight LaMotta at that time. But as Robinson grew into the weight, people realized that this is one tough son of a bitch. And Robinson didn't hesitate to stand there and slug in center ring with a guy like LaMotta. Don't forget, Robinson had trouble with Basilio, who was 5'6", and Basilio, just butchered Robinson their first fight at Yankee Stadium in 57 because he had him in the corner. He wouldn't let Robinson get out. He was good at that. Basilio was a master at getting under the other man's jab and pounding his body. And this is what LaMotta was doing. LaMotta was much stronger than Basilio. So LaMotta was, Basilio was a welter who came up the middle. LaMotta was born a middleweight. So LaMotta is using everything in his power. And he's rushing at him like a linebacker would at a quarterback. And Robinson's holding him. But when Robinson tries to hold him, LaMotta pushes him back against the ropes. And Robinson's looking to the referee, and LaMotta's just coming ahead using his head, arms, elbows, and he's pounding Robinson. To him, there's no etiquette here. There's no rule book here. This is a fight. We're fighting for our lives here. I'm fighting to get a chance at the world middleweight title. You're fighting to get a chance at the welterweight and or middleweight title. I'm not going to give you a chance. I'm not going to fight according to the rules. I'm not going to fight pretty just so it looks aesthetically pleasing or to make it easier for you. I'm going to try to kick your ass. I'm going to do everything I can. I'm going to hit you in the Adam's apple. I'm going to hit you low. I'm going to hit you in the arms. I'm going to hit you on the break. I'm going to use my head when you're clinching. I'm going to do everything I can. I don't want to lose to you. You're not going to get a gift like you did the first time you fought. I'm going to beat the hell out of you. And this fight went on, and it's only a 10-round fight, and LaMotta was smart to know that in a 10-round fight, rather than a 15-round fight, you can't take time off. In a 15-round fight, you can take seconds off here and there. He didn't have that time because he knew anytime he takes time off, Sugar Ray's going to flash some, spectacular combinations, and he's going to steal the round. I can't do that. LaMotta was in there like he was digging a trench, and while his car was double parked. He was just hammering Robinson. First round, second round, third round, fourth round. And you can see third round, fourth round, Robinson's getting gassed. I mean, he's in shape, but he's taking a ferocious beating to the body. The way to beat a guy like Robinson, who depends on mobility and speed, is to savage his body. And LaMotta kept doing it. So even when Robinson's clinching him, he's hitting him to the body. Even the referee goes like this. He's leaning forward with a left hook to the liver. And the referee just saying, Jake, you don't hit on the break. And LaMotta's like, whatever, who cares? And he just keeps coming forward. He knows that everyone wants to see this fight. Robinson's from Detroit. LaMotta's got his own fans there. No one's going to disqualify LaMotta. So he just keeps going forward and pounding Robinson over and over. And it's just this inexorable tidal wave of leather, and Robinson's doing his best to move, but he can't. He's young, and he's in shape, but LaMotta's beating the life out of him. He's pounding his body. And the more his sides are getting sore, he's in agony. And the more that happens, his legs just aren't working. His legs aren't getting him out of harm's way quick enough. And even when he uses his legs to move, and he'll move to the side, LaMotta's still on him with the right hand. LaMotta's hitting him in the head, on the eye, in the eyes on purpose. He's targeting his Adam's apple. He wants to hurt him in the throat. He's pounding his eyes. Even in a clinch, when they're holding like this, he's coming up to get his eyes. He's going after his nose. He's doing everything he can to make it a street battle for Robinson. He doesn't want Robinson to get in a rhythm, doesn't want him to get set, doesn't want him to get used to throwing those long jabs and coming in with the right hands. LaMotta's fighting a smart fight. He's staying low, and by staying, it's hard to punch down. So by staying low and moving side to side, it's almost impossible to time a guy like that. So Robinson's having a very difficult time getting his jab in there, and he's having a very difficult time landing combinations. And every time Robinson throws a jab or a right hand and misses, LaMotta counters him with a thud. He counters him with a right hand to the face, a left hook to the liver, counters him with a left hook right here, just above the groin, in the solar plexus, hits him with the right hand on the side of the neck. LaMotta is just doing everything he can to make this the worst night of Robinson's life. And he's succeeding. He's beating the hell out of him. And people aren't believing what they're seeing. And Harry Wiley's not very happy in Sugar Ray Robinson's corner. He said, "You're not fighting him the way I'm telling you to fight him." And Robinson said, "I'm doing the best I can." He's a lot better than he was last time. LaMotta learned from their last fight. Robinson, it's not that he didn't learn, but he was so superior to everyone else. What more was he going to learn? He was beating everyone out there. LaMotta to him was just another fight at that point in time. So he didn't really think he had to prepare especially for LaMotta. He did, but he didn't think this would be a different LaMotta than he fought the first time. And it was. Jay could realize I can't be a one-trick pony. I can't be a one-note fighter. I can't just bull straight ahead, because then he could, you grab me or shove me to the side, and then I'd have to chase him. LaMotta knew that he had to come in such a way as to cut off the ring. And by that, I mean, and we saw this last night with Tim Tszyu and Tony Harrison. When Harrison was against the ropes, he would be taking 5, 6, 7 steps in either direction. Tszyu only took 1 or 2. He just had to turn. And that's what LaMotta was doing. LaMotta cut off the ropes. So when your guy's moving, you're moving diagonally rather than straight, and you're taking less steps. So if your guy's moving to his left, you're taking 1 or 2 steps to get there first. And that means that's cut off for him. He can't get to that avenue. And then he's going to move to his right, and you're going to move 1 or 2 steps in that direction. And he can't move there. And LaMotta was brilliant at that, especially on that night. And their last fight, February 14th, 1951, the St. Valentine's Day Massacre, I think LaMotta just had very little left in the tank because he couldn't make the weight anymore. And he was 175 pounds about a month before the last fight with Robinson. And to get down to 160 killed him. Looking back on LaMotta's career, he probably would have been better served if he fought his whole career as a light heavyweight, even though he's only 5'9". Problem, of course, is the money was in the middleweight division. Much more money in the middleweights than in the light heavyweights. Middleweights was the glamour division. Why? Because most people are middleweights. At least at that time, most people walked around at that weight. So 175-pound man, light heavyweight, would be considered to be a big man. And LaMotta was physically stronger than Robinson, as were a lot of guys that fought him. But Robinson was a tough guy. And on this night, LaMotta had his number. And, this fight takes place in 1943, and LaMotta wins a 10-round decision. And so 2 years later, they fight again. And, it wasn't unusual even back then for, me to fight you on one night, and then 4 weeks later fight you again, and then 4 weeks after that fight you again, and then 3 weeks later fight you again, regardless of who won any of the fights. That was common. If the fans liked it and they saw it and they had a good time, then they were going to pay more to see it again. Now, on September 26, 1945, they fought again, and at Comiskey Park in Chicago, LaMotta weighed 159. Robinson was closer; he was 150. And Robinson had, in those 2 years since LaMotta beat him last time, had grown into his own body. Excuse me. So sometimes it takes a fighter a while to do that. Guys that are awkward, that are bigger, especially gigantic guys like Tyson Fury, it takes a long time for them to get used to their own body and their own size. So Robinson was now more comfortable as fighting at 150 pounds, because to fight at welter, he only had to drop 3 pounds. And he won a close split decision at Comiskey Park. LaMotta believed he won the fight. Most people in the newspapers believe LaMotta won. What's interesting about this fight is people say, well, you know what? Right after he beat him in Detroit, they fought again a week later in New York, and LaMotta won that fight. And this was really, they're getting it confused. It was this fight in 45 in Chicago, which was very, very close. And the problem with Chicago, of course, is Chicago's a mob town. It was run by the outfit, and it was hard for LaMotta to get a break in Chicago or anywhere. Now, did the mob fix this fight? We don't know that. We know that the mob fixed most fights in the 40s and 50s. We know that Robinson wasn't a mob fighter originally. He turned down Frankie Carbo's offers, you lose to this guy and then you beat him in the rematch. And he said no. And Robinson could say no, not because he had gangsters behind him or black gangsters, because he was the biggest draw in the sport. So Robinson said to Carbo, not to be rude, Mr. Carbo, but if I walk away, your money goes down 80%. And so Robinson, even when he lost, they still had to give him his due because, he's the money in the sport. Robinson wasn't a well-liked fighter, by the way. Robinson did this with LaMotta, but Basilio really hated him. And Carmen told me many times how, when they were supposed to fight at Yankee Stadium, he fought him twice. But he did it with a lot of fighters. What Robinson would do is you'd be an hour before the fight, and it's being broadcast. And Robinson would just say, I'm not going in the ring unless I get 25% more. And Basilio would look at him saying, you're getting a 75 or you're getting a 65-35% split. I'm not giving you up 25% of what I have left. That's ridiculous. I'm not fighting for that little. Well, no fight then. You got a signed contract. Well, we'll go to court, but I'm not getting in the ring tonight. And so what would happen is Basilio's managers and other managers of other fighters would give up a portion of their percentage to get Robinson in the ring. Now, it got Robinson more money, but of course, in the end, it antagonized Basilio and LaMotta and a lot of other fighters. And you don't want to give a guy more motivation to bash your face in. So this was quite common. So in the early to mid 50s, Robinson said he's had enough of boxing. He leaves. He doesn't want any more pressure from the mob. He's tired of it. He goes into show business. It's already in show business because boxing is entertainment. But he goes to nightclubs, becomes a dancer, a singer, and he's all right. Not great, but he's all right. And after about 3 years of this, he has a meeting because he owned all of Harlem. He had his restaurant, Charades. He had the great big Cadillac. He'd go to Europe and travel, and he'd have his manicurist with him. He'd have his hairstylist with him, his masseuse. He had at that time then, they called a dwarf that he carried with him, a little person. Didn't carry with him, carry that he took with him. And this was the way it was phrased in the paper back then. So he was sort of a dilettante. But after 3 years out of the ring, he goes to meet with his business manager who tells him, you're broke. and you owe hundreds of thousands to IRS. How did that happen? Well, all these 20 businesses, Sugar Ray Robinson's hairstyling, Sugar Ray Robinson's grocery store, Sugar Ray Robinson's manicure pedicure boutique, Sugar Ray Robinson's clothing store, Sugar Ray Robinson's shoe store, Sugar Ray Robinson's television set store. All of these places are managed by who? His relatives and close friends who rip him off. So now he's got nothing. So he's got to close it all, sell the businesses. It's not enough to pay off the taxes. He's got to come back to boxing. And now he's got to make a deal with James Norris, who runs the IBC International Boxing Club, and that's run by Frankie Carbo, the mobster who took over from Oni Madden when Madden went into exile in Arkansas and became the godfather of Arkansas. So Carbo was in firm control of boxing then. And to make a deal with Norris means you had to make a deal with Carbo and fight the fights Carbo wanted. There is no evidence, as far as I can see, or that I've heard from anyone, that Robinson ever went in the tank for the mob. Never through a fight. He came back. He lost his first fight back with Ralph Tiger Jones. And he comes back and he's winning fights. Eventually he beats Carl Bobo Olsen for the title. I think in two or three rounds knocks him out. But before that, he had the great February 14th, 1951 fight where he won the title from Jake LaMotta. Now, unlike Basilio, Basilio didn't particularly like Robinson. But when they had a night in 65 at Madison Square Garden to honor him, they had former opponents in the ring. And Basilio was one of them, and there were other fighters there. LaMotta wasn't invited, although he lived less than 2 blocks from Madison Square Garden. And the reason LaMotta wasn't invited was because he admitted to throwing a fight in front of the Kefauver Committee investigating organized crimes infiltration of boxing. Now that committee, that Senate subcommittee, still exists today. They still go after and look into fights today that they believe had organized crime influence. And there's quite a few. So what had happened with Jake LaMotta was, in order to get a fight for the world title, you had to make a deal with Carbo. Because Carbo said, I don't care who you beat. You're not getting a shot unless you go through me. So he agreed to lose to Carbo's fighter, Blackjack Billy Fox. And Blackjack Billy Fox was really a light heavyweight, couldn't fight. LaMotta assured the commission before the fight, no, I don't lose to anyone. I don't go into the tank for anyone. He loses in 4 rounds. It was obviously a fix. Robinson said he had hurt his, rotator cuff or his spleen, excuse me. And the commission believed him. And the commission believed him because the commission wasn't the final ruler. The final ruler was the mafia, was Frankie Carbo. And they said, believe him. And so he gets his license back and he keeps fighting. Even though he went into the tank for the mob and the mob made a fortune off of him, he still had to wait almost 3 years, 9 fights, and ended up paying another 30 grand in cold cash to Carbo before he gets a chance to beat Marcel Cerdan. That's what the mob did to him. Now, what's sad here is when Robinson dies in 89, he's got maybe $500,000 to his name. When LaMotta dies in 2017 at the age of 95, LaMotta had upwards of $10 to $15 million. He was very smart with the money he had. They show him as a comedian and, and Raging Bull. A lot of Raging Bull wasn't true, although Jake said to me one time, as mean as I was in that movie, I was a lot meaner in real life. So he invested in condos and land in Florida, and he made a lot of money off of it. So he ended up in financially good shape. And although he would repeat stories when he got older, you could sit and have a conversation with him. And I did. And, he was an interesting guy. I mean, when I saw him in 2009, 2010, LaMotta was, I guess, 88. He had his young wife who was in her 40s and a kid. He had like a 7 or 8-year-old kid. Now, he had a daughter and 2 sons. One son died of cancer. The other son died in that plane crash over Gander, Newfoundland. And he said to me he thought the death of his 2 sons was punishment to him from God by the way he lived his life. He said that's why a lot of times I said to him, that sounds a bit far fetched, but I understand what you're saying. You don't want to disagree with the guy. He's obviously still in pain. And he said a lot of times you'd see him on the ropes in a fight and he'd let a guy hit him. And he said he did that because he thought he deserved the punishment for the way he lived his life. That's a bit of a skewed view. Boxers can be like that at times. A lot of athletes can. But, he was the middleweight champion of the world. And who am I to upset him? Because even at the age of 88 or 87, and I'm, 49, I'm not going to take him on in a fight. It's still Jake LaMotta. So he had wonderful stories to tell. And I think I've mentioned this before. He said in the movie when Robinson beats him the last time, and he goes over to him and he says, "He didn't knock me down, Ray. It doesn't count." He said to me, "I never said that because he shredded my lips and knocked a lot of my teeth out, broke my nose." And he said, "I had to be carried to my corner. I couldn't catch my breath. I didn't say a damn thing to him, not for many years." And I said, "Do you hate him?" And he said, "No, I don't hate Ray. I mean, there were times I didn't like some of the things he pulled, but I let it go. Ray's a person, I'm a person. No reason for me to go after him or say bad things. He was a great fighter, and we became good friends." And you would think that's odd because LaMotta, when he was young, didn't look at anyone as his friend, except his brother Joey, and didn't trust anyone. But these men made history together. And when people look at their fights, most of the time they just remember the fight from February 14th, 1951. But they had fights, before that. And of the 6 fights they had, LaMotta won 1 officially. I think you can give him credit for the Chicago one, which was a split decision. And I think the one before that in New York, which was given to Ray, that one was very close. I mean, that could have gone either way. So I think looking at it as 5-1 for Ray Robinson wasn't really correct. I mean, that's how it officially is, but we know that sometimes the official scoring, especially back in the 40s and 50s, was easily skewed. Both of them were tremendous draws. The fight that LaMotta won, I mean, LaMotta was immensely proud. And you have to give Robinson credit because Robinson didn't make any bones about it. He didn't complain. He didn't say, "I got a raw decision. He hit me illegally, or he held me, or he did this." He said, "I lost to the better man. The better man won tonight, and all credit to him. Got to give him his due." And that's what boxing's all about. This is why last night I was upset watching the Tszyu Harrison fight, and after the fight, Tim Tszyu cursing repeatedly, "What's my MF name? They didn't do that back then. Guys like Robinson and LaMotta, Joe Louis never cursed when he was interviewed. Neither did George Foreman or Ali or Joe Frazier. So there's no need for that in the sport of boxing. If you get a chance, watch Robinson and LaMotta. Watch everything you can on them. The 13th round knockdown or stoppage from 51 is a great fight because LaMotta was in the fight for a long time. And then he just ran out of steam. Making the weight killed him. And as I said, he was in middleweight because there was more money at middleweight. But body-wise, for him, it would have been smarter to be at light heavyweight. But he didn't want to take the 55, 60% pay cut. And what's amazing about LaMotta, of course, is he ended up with all that money, even though the mob had stolen all this money. But LaMotta was not a predictable person. So the mob sort of was leery of him. They controlled him in his fights, but, they never knew if he was, LaMotta was in nightclubs where mob guys would make passes at his wife and he would beat the hell out of them. And, when these mob guys would complain to their superiors, you got to do something about him. They just don't antagonize him. This guy's a nutcase. Stay away from him. And when LaMotta testified in front of the Kaffer Commission, and when I spoke to him, he said, "I had no fear of them. I had a tremendous hatred of them. But that doesn't come from being brave. I was just too stupid to know how much danger I was." And he said, "But then again, being that naive is probably a good thing. Because if I wasn't, I wouldn't have done what I did a lot of the times." He said, I told them off in front of their peers and I beat up a lot of those guys. And there was never any blowback. And he said that was just pure luck. And I was lucky enough to meet him on many occasions here in Toronto and in New York. I never had a chance to meet Robinson. Robinson had bad dementia near the end of his life, and he did have money problems. But Angelo Dundee's good friend Melvin Dick. Melvin was a man who owns the second or third largest wine and spirits company in the southern United States. So he's very well off. He helped Ray Robinson. In fact, Ray Robinson went to his bar mitzvah, if you believe it. I mean, this is a story he told at Angelo's funeral. Angelo introduced him to Ray, and Ray went to his bar mitzvah. Imagine that, Sugar Ray Robinson driving you to your bar mitzvah and to your prom in his pink Cadillac, and he was the escort. You know, he acted like a butler or whatever, and they were good friends throughout their whole life because this was Mel's hero. And when Angelo brought him to Stillman's gym in New York, Mel would go in every day and just stare at Sugar Ray Robinson. He didn't care about the other fighters. He didn't care. And Robinson notices this white kid looking at him for like 3 weeks, and he turned and said, "Kid, every day you come in here, what's your problem? Why are you doing this? Why are you staring at me?" "Because I love you and you're my hero." And Robinson just had tears coming down his face. I mean, you know, being born in the South, moving to Detroit and New York, he knew what segregation and prejudice was. This kid didn't have it. This was a young Jewish kid who just idolized him. And they became good friends. So after his bar mitzvah, this is a great story. He's got his bar mitzvah suit on, and they go back to Stillman's gym, and Robinson has him telling everyone, "I just had my bar mitzvah." I did. And Angelo Dundee, who was fluent in Yiddish, by the way, was congratulating him, and all the other guys were congratulating him and all the fighters. And he said, "Go tell Joe Louis." And Joe Louis was taking a shower. And he literally opens up the shower curtain. There's Joe Louis completely naked, showering. He says, "Joe, I just had my bar mitzvah." And he said, "Good for you, son. Mazel tov. Close the shower curtain, please." And of course, this was explained to me. It's hard to say this. I have to clean this up. Joe Louis was, I don't even know if you get a Milton Berle reference. Joe Louis, friend of mine, a comedian, Kenny Robinson, parents own a jazz club in Winnipeg. And he has black and white photographs of Joe Louis coming up. And when Joe would visit, he would ask for all these different women of the evening to escort him. But their prices would go up 6-7 fold because they said Joe Louis was too much man for one woman. So when this kid walks in and opens the curtain and everyone's standing out there, including himself, kind of a funny moment. Anyways, that's way off topic. It was Melvin Dick who helped look after Ray Robinson when Ray Robinson had dementia, and he was with him a lot of the time. So Ray Robinson had a soft landing. It's not liked by many of the people that he knew or fought against, but certainly has to be considered the greatest fighter ever to have lived pound for pound. If you asked Angelo Dundee, my mentor, he'd say Willie Pep. LaMotta rates up there. LaMotta did more with what he had than any other fighter I ever saw. He had skill and he had toughness and he had no fear. And he didn't not have any fear because he wasn't bright. You can't have fear. Fear doesn't enter into it at that level. A lot of times you'll see critics today say that guy was afraid of that guy. It doesn't enter into it at the elite level of pro boxing. Fear only enters into it when you hurt your opponent and you fear that you may have fatally injured him. But being scared of someone, unless you're fighting a Liston or a Foreman, it just didn't enter into or a Lewis, it didn't enter into it. LaMotta and Robinson are inextricably linked together throughout the annals of boxing, as well they should be. People talk about the great fights, 3 fights of Tony Zell and Rocky Graziano, Arturo Gatti and Mickey Ward. Imagine 6 fights like that between these two, where there was very little give and take, except for the last fight. Every fight was close and went down to the last couple seconds of the last round. These were 2 of the all-time greatest fighters and middleweight champions ever to have lived. I'm Lou Eisen. That's Ring Talk. I hope you had a good time. See you again next week. Please visit my Substack, loueisen.substack.com. Once upon a time in the prize ring. This week, I started the first of a 4 or 5-part series on the history of the mob and boxing. And I'm sure you'll enjoy that. See you again next week at the same time. Bye-bye.